When my sister was born, my parents called me the leftovers and kicked me out to make room. But now they're calling me with bad news because karma has hit them hard. Growing up, I always felt like I was some kind of disappointment to my parents. My mom and dad were hoping for a girl. In fact, they had been trying for years to have a daughter, but instead, they got me. They didn't hide the fact that they were disappointed I was a boy. I overheard them saying they felt like they had gotten a spare, and I even remember hearing them call me the leftovers once. As a child, that didn't make much sense, but as I grew up, it really affected me. It was clear that I was only the child they had while waiting for something better. My parents kept trying for another child. In fact, that was all they talked about during family gatherings or when friends came over. I remember many people telling them they should be grateful to at least have one child, but my parents ignored them and said that unless it was a girl, they didn't really have any children. When I was 15, they finally had my sister, the miracle daughter they had been waiting for. She was everything they had hoped for. They poured everything into her, their attention, their money, and their time. From the moment she was born, I practically ceased to exist to my parents. I mean, I knew I already barely existed in their eyes, but when my sister came along, I became literally invisible. They barely had time for me and made sure everything related to me was handled in a way that allowed them to focus on my sister. I knew she was their priority and I accepted it. I mean, what else could I do? When I turned 18, it became very clear they didn't want me in the house anymore. On my birthday, my parents sat me down, not to celebrate, but to tell me they needed more space in the house and that I had to move out. Apparently, they thought that by me being there, I was taking away resources from my sister. I tried to explain that I didn't have anywhere to go yet and just needed a couple of months to save up and find a place. But they didn't care. They said they had fulfilled their legal obligation. They told me I'd had plenty of time to prepare and should be able to manage just fine on my own. And just like that, they kicked me out. I didn't have much, just a few bags of clothes and whatever money I'd managed to save from odd jobs during school. I ended up couch surfing at friends' places for a while and then moved into a tiny, rundown apartment. Those first few years were tough. I worked all kinds of jobs, from overnight shifts at convenience stores to heavy labor on construction sites, just to make ends meet. I never had a stable job and was constantly worried about paying rent or buying food. And yes, there were nights I went without eating, because I literally couldn't afford it. I had no contact with my parents during that time. I didn't call them, and they never reached out to me either, not even a text for holidays or birthdays. I figured they already had their perfect family, and I wasn't part of it. Yes, it hurt, but I learned to make peace with it. 9 years passed like this. Eventually, I managed to build a stable life. I had a steady job, a small but comfortable place to live, and friends who had become my chosen family. And then, out of nowhere, a few days ago, I got a call from them. Honestly, I thought something must have happened to one of them, so I answered. Besides, I hadn't heard their voices in all these years, and they sounded a bit erratic, to be honest. They told me they needed to talk to me about my sister. They went on to very dramatically explain that my sister was going through a tough time and was out of control. I was really surprised. I mean, she's only 12 or 13, so I didn't understand how things could already be that bad. But they said she was constantly skipping school, getting into fights, and even involved in serious trouble. She was already experimenting with substances, hanging out with shady people, and doing things that seemed completely out of control for someone her age. Apparently, they had spent a ton of money getting her out of trouble. They'd tried enrolling her in different programs and paid for all these counseling sessions, but nothing was really working. I understand that teenagers can be difficult, but it was hard to imagine someone so young spiraling out of control like that. It seemed like all those years of spoiling her were finally catching up to them, but I couldn't wrap my head around how bad the situation had gotten. After telling me all this, my parents said they needed my help. They wanted me to come back into their lives to support them emotionally and financially. They explained that taking care of my sister had taken a huge toll on them, and they couldn't handle it anymore. They tried to guilt-trip me by saying I was still their son and that family should come together in tough times. I was shocked to hear what my sister had become, but listening to them, not asking, but demanding, I helped them made me furious. Where was this united family when I was 18 and begging them to let me stay? Where was the family for me all these years? They threw me out without a second thought, and now, just because things didn't go their way, they wanted me to swoop in and save the day. I told them no, that I wasn't interested in helping them. I also told them I didn't see why I should get involved when I wasn't the one who raised my sister to be a nightmare. They didn't take it well. They told me I should help if I wanted to continue being part of this family. After listening to them rant for a while, I simply hung up. They still haven't stopped trying to contact me. My mom texted me, asking if I'd be willing to talk it over at dinner this weekend. So that's the introduction to my family. I know everyone here has their own experiences with their crazy families, so I wanted to share mine and see what you all have to say about it. Update 1. I wanted to provide an update because things have definitely progressed since my last post. Also, I saw a lot of questions in the comments, so I'll try to clarify a few things first. I want to make it clear that I don't really have negative feelings toward my sister. I actually don't know her. She was a baby when I left, and I haven't been around since then. To me, she's just a child I never got the chance to know, and any anger or resentment I feel isn't directed at her. I'm angry at my parents for how they treated me and how they made me feel like I didn't matter once she arrived. They are the ones who ignored me, kicked me out, and now expect me to come back to save them. I also saw some questions about what my parents were like when I was growing up and whether there was any abuse. Honestly, it's hard to talk about, but I think it's important so everyone can understand why I feel this way. My parents weren't openly abusive, but they definitely made it clear that I was more of a disappointment than anything else. They wanted a girl so badly that they talked about it openly in front of me. I remember them saying things like, "We'll finally have a daughter to love," and treating me like I was just there in the meantime. After she was born, it was like they couldn't wait for me to just leave. They saw me as the extra they didn't need, which probably explains why they kicked me out as soon as I turned 18. Anyway, I hope that clears things up. Now, here's the actual update. After reading your comments, I decided to follow some of the advice and contact my parents. Many of you suggested that if I wanted to close this chapter or better understand what they wanted from me, I should meet them in a neutral location. So I ended up asking my parents if they'd be willing to meet at a cafe in town. They agreed, and I arrived with the mindset that this would just be a conversation, not me getting involved to fix anything. I was still pretty angry, but I wanted to see what they had to say. When I arrived, I could immediately see that they weren't in good shape. They looked tired and much older than I remembered. They also seemed really stressed. At least they didn't waste time and got straight to the point. They started begging for help and gave me more information than they had the last time we talked. Apparently, my sister's problems are worse than I initially thought. Beyond substance use and legal issues, she's been through multiple rehab programs, all of which they've had to pay for out of pocket. She's been skipping school, running away, and causing trouble with friends who are bad influences. My parents said they've tried everything they could to change this behavior, but nothing has worked. It turns out they've sold a lot of their belongings, including my childhood home, to cover these expenses. Now they're living in a small apartment and struggling to make ends meet due to all the costs they've taken on to save my sister. They even talked about selling some family heirlooms to scrape together more money, which they believe will only last a few more months. I realized they weren't looking for forgiveness or understanding, they were looking for a solution. And to them, that solution was me. They needed someone to take on the financial burden of all the decisions they've made over the years. Hearing them talk just made me feel angrier and more upset with them. They still didn't get it. They still didn't understand that they pushed me away so far that I barely even knew them anymore. They didn't understand what it meant to be family. Yet they insisted I treat them like one. I let them finish speaking but told them I couldn't help. I explained that I had worked hard to build a life for myself after they left me stranded, and that I wasn't in a position, financially or emotionally, to support them. I told them I didn't feel any obligation to get them out of a mess they created themselves. They were furious, calling me selfish and accusing me of abandoning my family and being heartless for not helping my sister. I felt like nothing had changed. They were still trying to guilt-trip me as if I owed them something. I ended up walking out because there wasn't much more to say. I keep thinking about their situation and my sister, whom I don't even know. I feel bad for her, but I don't feel like I can save her. It's painful to realize that even after all these years, my parents still don't see me as an individual with my own life and struggles. This is a problem they need to solve themselves. In the end, they're the ones who caused it. Update 2. I'm back because things have gotten even crazier since my last update, which was just a week ago. I thought that telling my parents no would be the end of it, and I could go back to my boring life. But no, just a few hours ago, I got a call from my sister. It was the first time I've ever heard directly from her, and it completely caught me off guard. I barely know her. I only have vague memories of her as a baby right before I left home. So when I answered the phone and heard her voice, I didn't know who it was until she introduced herself. I had no idea what to expect, but figured maybe she wanted to reach out since my parents had done so. The call started off fine. She was polite, almost sweet, which surprised me given everything I'd heard about her behavior. She asked me to lend our parents money to help them with their current situation. I could tell she had rehearsed this speech because she was really laying it on thick, talking about how they were struggling and how I could save her. But I stood firm and told her I couldn't help them financially. I tried to stay respectful and explain that my relationship with our parents was complicated and that I needed to make decisions that were best for me. And then everything changed. She went from polite to furious in seconds. She started accusing me of being selfish and abandoning my own sister. She kept saying I was turning my back on my family and had always been jealous of her. She even claimed I was acting like I was better than them because I left and started my own life while they had been the ones supporting me all this time. It was almost like she had rehearsed those words too. I mean, she sounded exactly like our parents. She also seemed so convinced that it was my job to step in and fix everything. I was so taken aback that I couldn't even respond. After the call, I knew I needed to talk to my parents to figure out what was going on. Why did my sister think I had abandoned her? Where was all this hostility and anger toward me coming from? I called my parents, and as soon as they answered, I directly asked if they had told my sister I abandoned her and them. At first, they hesitated but quickly admitted they had been telling her for years that I left the family because I couldn't handle sharing their attention with her. Basically, they made me out to be a selfish older brother who couldn't deal with having a younger sister and who broke ties with them out of spite. For all these years, my parents have been feeding my sister this distorted version of why I left, painting me as some kind of villain. No wonder she felt like I had abandoned her. She grew up hearing that I left because I didn't want to share the spotlight. I practically hung up after that, and they haven't tried to contact me again. Though, of course, it's only been a few hours since I spoke to them. On top of that, I honestly don't know how to feel right now. On one hand, I am angry at my parents for lying to my sister about me and making her think I was the one who walked away. But I'm also frustrated with my sister for lashing out at me and demanding I help as if I owed it to them. I wish my parents had told her the truth about why I left. Maybe if they had, things would be different between my sister and me. I might not have been able to help my parents financially, but I could definitely have reached out to my sister and helped her change her behavior. But now, it seems like there's too much damage to repair. I'm not even sure if I want to try. This whole situation is so exhausting because just when I thought I was done with my family for good, they came back in the worst way possible. At this point, all I can do is block them, which I will. Although I'm still unsure whether to block my sister or not, none of this is her fault that our parents are like this. Also, I don't know why, but I still find it hard to believe that a child could end up in such an extreme situation, even with parents like hers. Update 3. It's been a few weeks, but that's how long it took for me to call my sister and have a conversation with her. I won't say it was easy because she still believed all the lies our parents told her, but after a few seconds, during which I asked her to let me tell my side of the story and then decide for herself, she opened up to me. I explained the real reason I left when she was practically a baby, how our parents viewed me, and how they viewed her. At least with that, I managed to get her to stop being so angry at me for supposedly abandoning her and our parents years ago. Then I told her the version our parents gave me about her being a problematic child, and she immediately denied it. She said she was a normal kid, didn't particularly like school but never skipped, let alone used substances or anything our parents claimed. She didn't even hang out with people who used those things. So I told her our parents were probably lying to get money from me with a sad story about how they lost our childhood home and had to sell things. But surprisingly, that part was true. My sister told me they did have to move, sell valuable family items, and tighten their belts. However, my sister couldn't believe our parents blamed her when, in reality, they caused it all themselves. According to my sister, my dad lost a lot of money gambling while my mom spent on unnecessary purchases. So here they were, claiming they spent money on my sister's rehabilitation, when in reality, they were the ones who needed rehabilitation for their own addictions. I asked her if our parents had sought help to address those issues, but she didn't know much because they usually kept her out of everything. She only knew the basics because it was obvious. My mom always came home with something new, while my dad would go out on Friday or Saturday nights saying he was going to the casino. Then there were the screaming fights between them, where they blamed each other for things, and my sister could hear everything. So all of this explains why my sister was angry with me. According to our parents, I was the bad guy who abandoned the family and couldn't even step in to help. At least, that was the lie they fed her all these years. After so much effort to have a daughter, they ruined it themselves with their own problems. Before we ended the conversation, I asked my sister if she was okay because I feared our parents might be neglecting or mistreating her. I think I'm a clear example that our parents are capable of that. But she said no, that they provided all her meals. I told her she could call me anytime she wanted because I'd like to be part of her life, and she said she would. So something good has come out of all this. I've regained, or rather gained, a sister, thanks to my parents. Their contact after so many years has served some purpose. At least I hope to have a relationship with her. Though with our parents around, I don't know what to expect from all this. Update 4. It's been a month since I started having contact with my sister. We've been calling and texting occasionally to talk and catch up since we didn't know anything about each other. We've talked about a bit of everything, her school, her friends, and her plans for when she's older, while I've shared about my work and things I enjoy doing, like hobbies and such. But a few days ago, my sister called me late at night, whispering, I woke up, and when I saw her number on the screen, I panicked. Nobody calls after 2 in the morning unless it's an emergency. She told me she had to speak quietly because our parents had taken her phone away as punishment. They discovered a chat with me and it enraged them, so they confiscated it. She had gotten it back late at night when they were already asleep and was calling to let me know she wouldn't be able to talk anymore, at least for a while, but I could hear in her voice that something was wrong. She told me that when they read all the messages, they started questioning her to find out what we had discussed. That's when she confronted them and mentioned the lies they had told, which led to her being punished and having her phone taken away. According to my sister, they only yelled at her, but she sounded too upset for it to be just a punishment. It felt like there was more to it. I don't know, call it a sixth sense or a sibling connection, but after the call, I had a bad feeling about the situation. Knowing our parents and how they were with me, I don't think it's far-fetched to think something else might be happening here. Sure, my sister was everything they ever wanted, but that doesn't mean they couldn't be mistreating her. People who are messed up enough to discard a child for not being a girl could do this and more. I spent a few days thinking it over, and it was eating me up inside. I couldn't call or text my sister because I knew our parents would read it, and the situation would get even worse. What I did a few hours ago was call Child Protective Services. I was worried, so I asked how long it would take them to act. They told me they would send someone to assess the situation within 24 hours. I explained that I didn't have proof of mistreatment by my parents but didn't know what else to do. Luckily, they reassured me that they could investigate and assess the conditions my sister was living in. And yes, I thought about going to my parents' house myself to check it out, but I also thought that if they were capable of doing something to my sister just for talking to me, I don't know what could happen if I showed up there. That is, they could act as if nothing was wrong and then do something worse. I'm not trained to spot signs, nor can I take my sister away from there. That would be kidnapping. I think the best thing was to call people trained for these situations. I'll update again when Child Protective Services gives me a report or something about their assessment. Update 5. I know I have a lot of private messages and comments to respond to, and I hope this post clears up several of your doubts. If not, maybe in a few days, I'll come back to sit down, read them more carefully, and reply. I've been busy because I'm adjusting to living with a child in my house, my sister. I think you can imagine what happened. Child Protective Services discovered abuse by my parents. That's the short version of what happened. Now comes the long version. Child Protective Services went to my parents' house and not only discovered abuse, such as my sister not being fed properly or receiving appropriate meals for a child, but also that she had recently been hit. When they punished her, they actually hit her, and she still had bruises when the CPS representatives arrived. A representative spoke with my sister alone, and she was able to tell them some things after they assured her they could take her to live with me. At first, she didn't want to open up because she was afraid of what our parents might do to her if they brought her back home. But once they guaranteed they would take her away from there, she asked to be brought to my house. She told them everything in detail, and later, she told me as well. I won't repeat here what she told me, but it was really terrible. So, a few days later, Child Protective Services brought her to my house. I couldn't refuse to take her in, especially because I know all too well what it's like to live with our parents. This happened just a month ago, so it's been quite an adjustment. I hadn't seen her since she was a baby, so she was practically unrecognizable to me, but we've adjusted as best we can. For now, she sleeps in an improvised room, which is my living room, since my house only has one bedroom. Everything happened so quickly that I haven't had time to prepare anything better. However, we're already looking for a bigger place with 2 bedrooms so she can have her own space. As for my parents, I don't know much, but they're prohibited from coming near my house or my sister, and consequently me, which is good because otherwise they could get into more trouble. They're already facing several problems for mistreating their daughter, so I don't think they're willing to add more complications to their list. Update 6. Here's a brief update for everyone who's been concerned about my story. My sister and I have moved and found a slightly larger place. It's not much bigger, but at least it has a bedroom for each of us. As for my parents, I can only say they've had to take an anger management course and pay a fine. It's not much, they should be spending time behind bars, but at least my sister doesn't have to return to them. That's all that matters to me. My parents already have enough problems, in addition to the ones related to Child Protective Services, such as their gambling issues, compulsive shopping, and debts. I don't know the details, but at least from what my sister has told me, those problems were significant even when she was still living with them.